I do wonder, like, when you're talking about those anxieties, was that, not saying that was, I'm not minimizing it, but I do wonder, like, was that your gut? Was your gut telling you here's some instincts there that were coming in, and it was hard to distinguish between, okay, is this anxiety or is this my gut?
I'm really excited about today. We've been waiting for
so long.
Months? Has it been months?
It's been honestly probably close to a year.
No, but yeah, well, it's been that, but
12 months.
But it was recently spurred on, and it's been recently spurred on. Yes.
Our juicy topic at hand.
Yes.
Though I wouldn't say juicy, I think everybody goes through this at some point in time, unless they make it out of the dating scene unscathed and marry their high school sweetheart and
Wouldn't
never.
that be nice?
But yeah, that's my way of saying yours truly. Oh gosh, this won't air until probably a month or two from now, so it'll be better. Is freshly single and freshly
wounded,
broken up.
Yeah.
Yay! Well, a couple months ago, so I'm at level-headed. I won't break down and cry into my tea asking Michelle questions.
But
I'm getting a therapy session.
I
from
will
Michelle.
say, this is the nice
counseling.
thing. We are having therapy because we need to talk through these issues because we realize they really are haunting us.
But I feel you understand this on a deeper level.
I understand this because I have been divorced for 2 years now. And that's just a weird thing to say. And it's a weird thing to say, particularly because of my kids. I just love them so much. So to say that, it feels like I'm uncovering them a bit. But it's also a real true fact of my life. But we're excited to have a real clear, beautiful professional on here who is an amazing woman and a neighbor of mine.
Yes.
She also is a fellow walker in my, which some people think I'm saying hey moo. It's hey mo. That is the hay outside that is collected and it feeds the cows. So just FYI, that's what hey mo is. But I am so wonderful. It's so wonderful to have you, Michelle Gallimore. I fondly call Shelley.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your you can give us all your letters after your name and all that. And then
legal documents.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Michelle. I am a licensed counseling supervisor. I've been in counseling now for 12 years. And in this time, part of my journey, I started looking at ways that I could help the individuals who walked into my office. And so some of the things I learned was about brain health, so I got certification in that. But I also did 2 certifications that God definitely navigated and just intertwined that in my life. One, I'm a certified sex addiction therapist, and then I'm a certified partner trauma therapist.
Wow. So what does that last one mean?
So certified partner trauma therapist is where I work with individuals who've experienced infidelity in their relationships, betrayal trauma. So yes, and that what happened was, as a counselor, even though I was equipped to do counseling, there was a component to when individuals came in who experienced infidelity in their relationships that was very traumatic and felt like I just needed some deeper work and training in that so that I could help men and women who've experienced betrayal. And sometimes betrayal is actual where there's been multiple affairs. Sometimes the betrayal is with pornography. Sometimes there's financial betrayal, emotional affairs, different pieces like that. And so by going and getting trained, I felt like I was more equipped to help those who are coming to my office, because I understood not only was there a betrayal and the violation that comes in that, but that also was very traumatic, and being able to do it through a trauma lens.
Well, let's backtrack a little bit, and before we get to that part, because that's the end game part of it. The beginning game is, and I hope you don't mind if I speak personally about you.
Go ahead.
But just watching you delight in a relationship, and
for like the 3rd time.
Well, but this was way different. This was very. There was something very different about it, and it was so promising. It just seemed on point. I don't know the right words, but you were light. You all. It was really.
It contrasted the others like completely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like the real deal. It made all the others look like shadows.
Yes.
You know, it looked like the real one. How did all of this feel with you? I mean, how like. Because I mean, you were on such but you were also very balanced in this relationship, which was a great thing. So where do you want to start in that?
Ooh, as in when I was in the relationship or when it ended?
Well, I think tell a little
the
bit how you
emotions
felt.
going in.
Yeah. How you were, and then how disappointed you were.
I actually, it's oddly freeing to be able to talk about this kind of, I don't want to say explicitly, but you think of all these things you write, all these things you process your brains out. And I'm not trying to make it sound like a breakup is the most traumatic thing ever, or like to levels of losing somebody physically, but it does have an impact. So going into it, like Renee said, it was completely different than any other relationship. And I'm not one to commit easily. You know, I'm very thorough. And I had a string of just a terrible dating life and worked really hard the last year. It was almost a year and a half of just not dating anyone. And I didn't intentionally decide that, but I decided to focus on pursuing things that were life-giving, intentional, what was right in front of me, working on myself.
You were really growing, thriving. You went into this very healthy.
Yeah. So I went into it a lot healthier than the others, whereas I was much more, I would say, I don't want to say impulsive, but more emotionally driven, if that makes sense. And so with this one, I think that I just took a step back and really thought everything out first and like really evaluated myself and working really hard to not self-sabotage, because I noticed that my tendency was I would almost look for things or look for ways to ruin things because I was so convinced that I wasn't worthy of love, that I wasn't, which I got to a lot of really deep core parts of myself. So going into it was really hard, and it was long distance, which I'd done before. So I was trying to not, parallel them to everybody else and, put to rest the things of the past while also being open to it again. So then, things unfolded and like, some people in my family had known this person. So there was like a connection where I was like, okay, I feel really safe with this. This feels really good. It was how they initially pursued the relationship was different than any other guy. Expectations were known, intentions were known. And the pace of it was very much to my standards, and thinking that it was something where it was this like full commitment on both ends. So I went from easing into it and still feeling all these anxieties like, oh my gosh, what if every fear comes true? I wrote like 30 pages of fears in my journal one day. Ease into the relationship. This is December, right? So December, we meet in person, hit it off. It's great. Do the whole commitment thing.
And you initiated it.
Yeah, all of it. And I worked really hard to not project my fears and anxieties on him and like speculations, things I struggle with in the past. Yeah. And I would process through like Renee or two close friends of mine, husband and wife in Florida before, my tendency is to like speculate things.
And your mom.
And and my parents.
Because they've known you and they've always...
Exactly. So a lot of wisdom going into it. So I felt really good, really hopeful. And there were just so many things that I looked at and thought, wow, this is uncanny. Like, and I saw it so much through a lens of, wow, I think this is like God's redeeming nature to my string of awful relationships, serial dating, and like we talked about in our Cadaver podcast, using people at one point to get over a breakup. So all of that to say, it was like, I felt really grounded, and then...
You were.
Yeah.
You were extremely.
While still wrestling with like these pit of the stomach anxieties where I'm like, okay, I'm just self-sabotaging. I'm just creating stuff in my head. And then there were a couple of things where it was indeed not self-fulfilled prophecy things. It's like, okay, I didn't have any control over X, Y, Z. And actually... Oh my gosh, I might be sharing way too much about saying this. We're supposed to run a marathon together. And kind of.
And I'm like
we would be going-
congratulating her. I received a picture.
Yes.
So our families were supposed to meet each other. It was like this huge ordeal. And 2 days before I broke up and broke things off. And it wasn't anything of, infidelity or this like hardcore, like, I found Playboy magazine.
Right.
It was just some things I had wondered if they were true came to light in one conversation. And it was kind of like the Jenga block pulled to where I knew I couldn't move forward even to the point of meeting family, doing the whole shebang. And it felt in that moment and the couple weeks following like this shell shock, this visceral pit of the stomach, like your organs are sucked out of your body. Because in my head I'm thinking, okay, I can write all this down that I know to be true. Not it was some, I wouldn't say finding something like other women do, and as I had in other relationships, it's like, this feels slightly traumatizing, like, again, porn type stuff. However, it was almost the failure of expectations and thinking that, almost gaslighting myself into thinking, this was all my fault. And, even though they inevitably didn't feel as committed or the same pace, which was interesting. We were running a marathon because I'm like, we're going 2 different paces. He's obviously 2 hours and an hour faster.
Well, and there was a
so you get on the same race. If you're at different paces, you can't really keep up. And that was kind of metaphorical for it. But it's been, and it's getting a lot better as it always does. But it's been like this shell shock feeling, or it was, but then just like ruminating, re-questioning and thinking like, was this a self-fulfilled prophecy, even though I see things clearly, and just ruminating.
I do wonder, like, when you're talking about those anxieties, was that, not saying that was, I'm not minimizing it, but I do wonder, like, was that your gut? Was your gut telling you, here's some instincts there that were coming in, and it was hard to distinguish between, okay, is this anxiety, or is this my gut telling me?
Actually, I love that question, because there was one person who mentioned that, and I felt actually in one conversation, by like few conversations, almost like they were trying to rationalize, because I did feel like it was my gut speaking. It didn't, because there was this moment I had where I was reading actually old breakup letters where I'm like, and they're super well thought out. It's not like, F you, etc., Taylor Swift slang. It's like philosophical, go in peace, brother.
Yes.
Closure. I bury my dead through breakup letters. And it was like the conversation we had, reading those letters while they had left for a little while. I knew that I needed to do it. Yeah. How do you know what's anxiety and gut instinct, though? Because that, I felt almost a little rationalized by a couple conversations, like making me feel almost crazy, and like I was just ruining something where I'm like, no, you don't understand. There's this whole layer of stuff where I don't think I'm...
You feel like the crazy one.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're making more of it. But however, you would text me and I would be saying, Anna Gray, this is not all right. This is not all right.
You're the only person who really got it.
Well, because it reminded me of just some things from my own past. And I'm going like, no.
Yes, it.
I mean, the planning and everything that you were left out of. It's just, yeah, I haven't, I'm not.
No, it's good. It is oddly therapeutic to publicly say, hey, here's what it's like walking through a breakup.
Yeah. So, I mean, it just,
important.
it triggered me. And I was, it didn't trigger me because I hate to use that word, but it just, I was just like this, and it was so wild to watch her, Shelley, because she was like second guessing. She goes, maybe I'm like making too much of this. Maybe it's just, and I'm like, no.
She was the only, Renee was the only person. Like, there were a few others, or some people were like, okay, this and that, but it was mostly Anna Gray, you're acting irrationally. But you were the one voice who, it was after the first incident where you're like, Anna Gray, you're gonna be like, you're in a box forever, and kind of were never on board after that, which I valued that, because you understand.
Well, I wanted it to, I wanted to make sure something happened. It went haywire very fast.
She picked up on it, I think, because like you had walked through that in, is it okay if I say marriage?
Yes, many ways.
Yeah.
It just,
and so
like,
you could soulfully
Well, no. The thing is, you're being told one thing,
That's it.
another thing's happening, and the whole doubt that you have in your ability to even understand, you're totally looking at yourself and thinking, "This is me. I'm going crazy."
Yes.
And that's the key.
I'm
You start
self-sabotaging.
You start
Self-fulfilled
questioning
prophecy.
yourself.
Right.
And really minimizing what that gut's telling you.
Yes.
How do you distinguish gut versus anxiety?
No, I think that's a good question. Well, the thing is, like with anxiety, that usually, is coming out of, say, a situation or there's a conversation. Like anxiety comes out of our response is kind of that fight or flight when there's that anxiety piece. But the gut is to where it's telling you something's off. Like we're feeling anxious because something external is affecting us, but with that gut, it's because there's something internal that's telling us that this is off, and that's like the best way to look at it is external, internal.
Would the gut be intuition? The God-given thing.
That's it.
That we have.
It's that discernment in that piece. A lot of times, what I'll do is I'll tell individuals to look at things that you value and what's important to you, and say, for instance, in this situation, if that individual is not respecting or violating those things that you value, that's usually coming from your gut. You may be feeling anxious because it's causing these feelings for you, but really that individual is violating things that are important to you. That core being is what's happening in that.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you viscerally feel it because I don't want to say, or some would say, oh, you hold your values like in your gut, but it's almost like holding something you treasure really close physically. Is it almost like internally? Whoa. Okay, this is taking a deeper...
Sorry.
No, this is really good.
Yes. And what happens though? Okay, so that happened with you. My story's much longer because I was in a marriage for a very long time. You begin... A lot of times you may have that, but you begin to shut down that still small voice, that gut thing, because you try to do the change, you try to do everything.
Right.
I was reminded today about just how terrible a people pleaser I am. It's just like, you can tell me all about me, what's wrong with me. My favorite thing is the editing process, and her mother is one of my favorite editors, because she will sit there and she'll say, nope, absolutely not. I'll say, these are 2D characters, absolutely. She will just and it is beautiful because I love it. But you can do that also to my face about me, and I will take it every time without questioning it, or if I question it, I will always know it's me doing the wrong, and I can't even look at it fairly, and I will always issue an apology, except for I'm beginning to change a little more.
Well, that's what's happening. Like you're almost like you're being that scapegoat. Like you're, I'll be the one who takes the blame. And what happens is we're really moving away.
But I'm so like this with family. I'm so like this with family, and I was like that. Wait a second, I was like that in the marriage, so much so that I think it was more, I don't know what it is. I guess people pleasers like that little steady state of we want everybody to get along, is that, and so now continue on with what you're going to say.
No, if you don't mind, I'm going to comment on a couple of things. Like one of it is we're moving away from who God's called and created us to be. And that's so important. Like what happens is, like, for you, you're a great helper. Like you're great at helping people. But what happens is we move to this other extreme of where I'm people pleasing because that helps my anxiety, or helps me feel better because I know how this person feels. And really what we want to do is come back to the middle of, okay, I can be a helper, that I'm not going to enable. I'm not going to be that pleaser because God's called and created me to be this helper. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a strength. But what happens is we'll end up falling into the people pleaser. We end up being that rescuer. And God's not called us to be that. We, yes, want to bring honor and glory to Him. And yes, we want to be able to help people, but God's the rescuer. He's the one who does that, but we end up falling into that. And a lot of times we're responding to the anxieties, not to our gut, because our gut's saying, oh, no, stay here. Stay in the middle, even though it's uncomfortable.
The battle that's going on. Did you feel the battle recently?
Yes. As in internally?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And
absolutely.
I mean, you were...
I couldn't sleep. Yeah. I literally was losing sleep. Can't eat, physical. But continue.
No, I mean, well, that's it. I mean, that's just what happens. So that's some of these pieces of what I've just learned in my work over time. And being with clients, I learned so much from my clients. Like my training and the books I read, podcasts are great. But I learned so much from the individuals who walk in there because God gives me this insight and is able to connect the things I've learned with those individuals. But that's what happens. We become anxious because we're moving away from who he's called and created us to be.
Oh, my goodness.
He wants us to be here, even when it's uncomfortable. Like, we can look at examples in Scripture. I'm sure there were times when Gideon probably felt uncomfortable.
Right.
There were probably times when we can look at in the New Testament and the situations that happened there where it was uncomfortable. Right. But it's okay to be in that uncomfortable place as long as you're being true to who God's called and created you to be. Oh, but what we try to do is overcompensate. And we go to, let me be the helper, let me be the rescuer, let me fix this. Yeah. Whoa. And then that's when we stop listening to our gut or using discernment, using that insight God's given us. The other part, though, is sometimes there's individuals that actually will, through manipulation, a big buzzword is gaslighting, stonewalling. We hear that a lot. But sometimes individuals do that, and we do begin to doubt ourselves because we are trusting, here's someone we've been vulnerable with, just even emotionally vulnerable with. I've trusted this person. We made vows to each other. And now he's telling me there's something wrong. Yeah. No, that's not true.
Yes. Yes.
And it will, yeah. Trust and betrayal in relationships versus marriage. What would you say are some commonalities you see, differences, common denominators?
I would say it's very similar. The only difference would be like with marriage, there's that next step and that vow and in that commitment. And one of the pieces also with individuals who live in the same home, the way I describe it is when your spouse is the one doing the manipulation, what happens is we're constantly in survival mode at home. It's how I describe it is, say there's a lion coming after me. Well, I've got responses. I can either fight it, I can run from it, I can hide and freeze. There's a new one, it's called fawn, which is where what can I do to keep the lion at bay? So I'm going to give it a steak just to keep it at bay.
That was me. Like I laid it down. I laid it down. But the idea of being in survival mode, I cannot tell you.
That's it.
It even changed my sleep pattern. Yeah. And this is for years. I slept like this. Yeah. Upside, like my shoulders, my neck it was just, and it was self-protection.
Because the lion was right there.
Yeah.
See, that was the piece. Like it was constantly like, this lion's not going away. Yeah. I don't have a safe place in my home. So I would say that would be a difference if you're living with someone who is being abusive or manipulative. That's going to be the difference, and not living with that person, because at least you can be home. That lion's not in the house. Yeah. I can have that safe place here. I'm not saying it's still not going to affect our sleep. It's still not going to create this doubt with our gut.
I will tell you this, and I've never said this, and I don't think I've ever said this to you, but, or maybe I have. I probably did. But
expose it to light,
when
baby.
The lion was booted off the property, it was... I didn't, and there were biblical reasons. I never missed any of that feeling. And and particularly because, when you have kids in the house, you want to protect them. Yes. But there was just a sigh of relief that went over the house. Just a sigh. Just...
Yeah, you could breathe.
We could breathe. And now there's been a lot of work through that. But you know.
Well, yeah, some of it is we change our patterns, even how we sleep. Like there was possibly for a few nights or a few weeks, you probably still slept like
I
this
know,
because this was normal.
Months,
Like, okay, this is normal. So it was undoing what we had normalized. You mentioned in a dating relationship, that would be really integrated. The only thing I could think would be different is if you're not living with that partner, then at least you have that safe place at home.
But
you
even
can
then
still,
it wasn't. Because,
Well, and mine wasn't manipulative either, which was weird. And it's interesting how Renee's, it was a sigh of relief. I convinced myself that I would rather be in pain with someone than without them.
okay,
And almost make it worse. And especially if they weren't manipulative in ways in which you can see the red flags. Like in The Lion, for example, they would put it off like clear black and white, no question about it. This is morally wrong. This is biblically wrong. Mine, the word betrayal sounds really extreme, but I realized and things were exposed to light where it seemed that I was being led to believe there was this full commitment, like from the texts and affirmations and plans, but then the actions weren't mimicking that. And there were some, I need to be careful how I say this too, because I don't want to paint the wrong lighter extreme, if that makes sense. Because I'm aware, like, who knows who could be listening. And this isn't meant out of hatred, nothing, no hate in my heart. I know Renee's the same way.
Yeah.
But there was an instance where it seemed there was perhaps some people who had migrated back from high school years.
okay.
And perhaps that was causing some confusions. And I was sensing, all right, there was some concern on there, and that they had accidentally led this previous person to believe things. But I started kind of to get this gut question of maybe their confusion with me is this person's now texting them back in their life. And, you know, there's another incident, things that weren't necessarily, they weren't going out looking for it. It was coming to them. But that to say, I felt,
Yeah, but there was
I felt
also there was an openness to encourage this.
right.
There
That's
was some
true.
deception that was going on.
It felt a bit like that. And again,
Or he was deceived too in his mind, thinking that it was all right.
Right.
I think maybe that was it. Too.
Maybe so, because I think you can be unaware that you're doing something or feeling something, or you're not wanting to harm somebody else by like just cutting ties when you feel confusion. But in turn, whereas I think with breakups, or if there's another person who comes in the picture and you're confused, I think I always see it as you're either fully committed to someone, you set really strong boundaries, and you don't leave someone in the dark on how you're feeling, or you sever it and you move forward. But that to say, I'm not trying to jump over like what you share, but more so to parallel, because I find it interesting that you've experienced, you know, breach of trust, you've experienced betrayal, you've experienced the relief of that being gone. And then I've experienced, I don't know if you would call this betrayal. It felt like it. Integrity is so important to me. But it wasn't, oh, they slept with someone and, you know, they were caught like going out with somebody else. But it felt like there were these pieces and I was left in the dark with so much that it was like living a lie when everything I felt was completely real and there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Or is that like
No, it does make sense. But that creates like confusion then, because here's someone where I don't mean this and I'm not trying to minimize, but you were like, okay, I'm taking this slow, I'm balanced, I'm making sure I'm checking the boxes, and in this,
He was checking the boxes.
Yes, and then in this piece, here is.
But she was. Yeah.
I mean, you entered into that like in a healthy way, in what first appeared to be healthy, which I think that's the Lord, and you pacing yourself, you started recognizing, wait a minute, there's a piece here, there's a piece there. And
there was a really, I would say, there was a rush to commitment, and then there was a total back withdrawal.
It was super fast paced, which I was okay with if the guy's like completely committed and they're like,
so this
if they
is
call
more
your
of attachment.
if they call your dad to let them know their intentions.
So this is more of an attachment piece, and sometimes that happens with individuals who are either avoidant or have like a disorganized attachment style. Is sometimes we'll go full in, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got to pull back.
Oh,
That's
but
that
that
could
creates
be
so much whiplash in your brain to where it felt devastating to me.
Yeah,
it almost felt like watching every fear I wrote down slowly come to life. And I was like, no, God's redeeming this. Check, check, check.
Yes.
I don't feel like, crazy or a freak or, like it's all going to go down the drain. Yeah. But how do you describe the differences, or I don't know, between Maya and Renee's experiences? Obviously, they're different in that she was married. She felt this relief when this was gone. I always second guess myself that I did something wrong. And maybe I'm not saying it's all on one party. Right. I never think I'm the only person that, did all good. Of course there are things, but I always convince myself that I would rather be in pain with someone than without them. Whereas it's like relief for you to have it gone.
Well, but that I also had.
But my response to that is yes. There's going to be times when we make mistakes or wish we had approached something differently, but it does not justify the behavior.
Oh, say that again.
I was like, whenever, regardless of what we've done or how we approach something or what we said, it never justifies the other's behavior. They can always respond differently.
Oh, that's very huge, because I think we both have taken this on ourselves and said this is, because I look at it and I just realize that I'm still carrying it. That's why I go to counseling at the Oaks. But because my counselor had me write all these words that I was feeling about myself. And she's this pillow. I told you about this little. We talked about it or something. So I picked all these negative words. Because that's how I felt. And it wasn't even. I wasn't even particularly talking about my relationship, but years of feeling that it's on me and I'm doing this Can you speak on that some?
Not to do a counseling session, but I heard you even say they were negative words.
Oh, they were all on the purple and the gray side.
But they're emotions.
Yes.
That just because we have these emotions don't mean they're bad.
Right.
It's what we're feeling based off that situation. So just want to encourage you, softly encourage you that just because you felt that doesn't mean it was negative or bad. It may felt negative to you. That doesn't mean it was bad because that's what you were feeling based off of those situations.
Yeah, but I also need to work through those words.
Right. Not because they're negative, but because you want to process it so you can move forward.
How do you process stuff like that? And with Renee,
I know. She's already told me I need to start. She goes, my counselor. I love it because she knows that we're like, you're a journaler and I'm a journaler. She's like, don't try to do it all in one day, and I'm like, no. I must cuss. Like, no.
That's why I was like, I don't want to do a counseling session.
Did you flip off your counselor?
No, I didn't. I was like, there's no way. There's no way.
Yeah. But what was the other part of that question? I just couldn't. When I heard that, I don't want anyone to feel like when we feel angry or whatever emotion it is, that doesn't mean it's a bad emotion.
Okay, that is a very big thought. I don't even know what to do about that.
You can process it with your therapist.
Except for, I know, I will.
Write that down.
It reminds me of that movie Inside Out.
Yes.
Because you have to have.
That's the third time for that movie quoted in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Continue.
But it reminded me of that.
Yeah, I mean,
they're
we
coming
need
out in
that.
part 2. Like, I guess they're getting inside your brain this time. And part 3 will be my brain. Yeah. So, but it, you can't have a life lived on this fallen world is truly going to have. I mean, and obviously in the Old Testament, which I'm reading right now, God is full of all sorts of emotions, and plenty of them are on the purple and gray side.
Yeah, and it's all about what we do with the emotions. We can feel those emotions, and it's important we identify it. Okay, but what's the behavior going to be? How are we going to respond to it? So if I'm feeling confused because of these mixed messages, what am I going to do with that? That's the key. having that emotion, there's nothing wrong with it. It's then being proactive and responding, not reacting, responding to, okay, now what am I going to do with this?
Okay, I'm going to ask you, Anna Gray.
Oh.
But I've noticed, even with grief, like, because we have another podcast that's buttoned up to this one that I literally called Anna Gray. I'm not going to tell you what it is called unless she thinks that we want to do.
Yeah.
Because I realized it was stunning to me to think this. Should I say that?
Yeah, say it.
Yeah, I said to her, just point blank, I said, Anna Gray, I realize I'm just not okay. I am not okay. And I had said it to my counselor first, and it was circulating down here. And then it came up here, and I said to her, I said, I'm not okay. And by saying it, there was like this great release.
That's it.
And you were worried about burping, but it wasn't a burp.
A word belch.
Give me one of those chips. No, but no, it was a word belch, but it felt so relieving to say that.
That's it.
So what happens? Because there's something in us, and because I'm dealing with, my sister's, my brother in heart's loss,
that loss,
and she's dealing with that loss, and I'm thinking, I'm free, but I've started thinking about this whole being married for all these years and then not being married, and what does that look like, and was it wasted time? Was any of it, I mean, the children are the blessing, obviously.
That's it, yes.
But in all that, I realized, like, there's delayed reactions.
There is.
I mean, like,
There's
almost-
it's delayed
yeah.
grief. Like there's actually a term they call it delayed grief.
well,
Really?
there you
Yes,
go. It
yes.
makes sense.
It is, because sometimes whenever there's trauma, there's always going to be grief.
And trauma, no, we don't want to, I mean, trauma, we know there's trauma centers and all that. That's for people who are bleeding out. But really, when you're grieving, which you did, which I
Yes.
have finally, by just saying that to her, I'm like, okay, I need to do this.
Yeah.
It is a form of emotionally bleeding out.
It is. Yeah. And it's so important. Like, I love y'all's relationship you have, because you're verbalizing, you're talking about this is what's happening. See, what happens a lot of times, we store it and it stays in our body. Like you were talking about when you were able to say, I'm not okay, your body wasn't storing those words anymore and the feelings that were attached to it. I mean, that's what, like, when you being able to talk to Renee about what happened in that relationship, that was so important, because then your body wasn't storing that. Because that's what happens. We're either, that's not part of that freeze piece, or where we just store it, we just keep it in here. And we have to be able to release that.
So, yeah, you go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No,
You're on
you
a
have
good,
question.
like...
You have a question.
Well, it's interesting because obviously we started this podcast because we realized, wow, we're the same person in different bodies, parallel life happenings.
Yes.
In different ways.
But I'm curious
Yes.
because breakups, divorce, they're obviously so very different, and the connection, I've told Renee this too, is so much weightier with divorce and what someone must experience than a breakup where it hasn't been that full commitment. But what are some... Do you find that there are any commonalities between the two, or how they can mimic each other, or do you think that they're completely different concepts?
Oh, no, I definitely see the commonalities, and sometimes
I
I've
do
worked.
too, and I think you downplay it.
I do. I mean, it's there because, well, and of course it depends on the relationship, but whenever, like what you were describing, I don't know fully, you know, I'd have to be able to assess, but whenever we're in this tension of, okay, here, this is how I describe it, like we're right here together, here's partner A, partner B, and all of a sudden this partner goes over here, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on, what's happening? And it's like, okay, do I come over here? Do I wait here? Because that's more the secure attachment. And so we start to have this confusion because, well, you were here before, and now what's happened that's caused you to shift away and to go away? And that can happen in a marriage too.
Yeah,
The
you
same
were
thing can
definitely
happen.
in confusion. I mean,
Yeah,
I was.
and it's interesting even reflecting on all of it, because like obviously I'm in a place now where I'm open even to dating again. Like I've been okay and felt at peace with just casually talking to people, you know, if it naturally is ebbed and flowed, and it has a little bit, but it's not like, oh, it's this like immediate devastation as it was 2 months ago. Yet the same feelings, and this is what I was thinking about today actually, because I've been journaling my brains out. Is it almost exacerbates and feels like it verifies past fears or that I experienced in others and says, no, this is the truth about yourself. All these fears, all these things you thought were true, like it's true because this also didn't work out, and look how seemingly good it was.
And that could come up in a marriage too. Just like in a dating relationship, the same thing could come up in those pieces. Really, what I would see would be the difference is if one relationship had sexual intimacy in it and a deeper emotional intimacy, which is what you would normally see in a marriage. Usually a dating relationship, you're not going to see quite that commitment or that deeper level of intimacy. That would be the only difference that I would see between a dating relationship where there's been that confusion or unhealthy attachments in a marriage. But other than that, the feelings are going to be there. We're going to experience these things. Doesn't matter if we dated for 6 months or we dated for 5 years. I mean, we're going to feel those pieces in that. Those emotions are going to be real and raw, and the gut is going to respond the same way in a marriage as it would in a dating relationship.
How do believers, and I know, obviously I'm not going to like spill your story, but in marriage, because you also lived out marriage the most biblically I think I've ever seen in someone who like could have walked away who normally, and especially among like secular culture, could have walked away like way sooner.
But what about when you notice,
like say you're in a like a marital commitment, like in Renee's place, but you wake up and realize that you've drifted, like you were in a relationship, but you can't do anything. You can't fix them. You can't break up with them because it's a marriage. How do you?
It is.
I don't know.
A different game.
Did you wrestle with that? And if that's too deep of a question, you can edit
no,
that out.
I had talked to God about it often. I said, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful, just extremely for eternity grateful that the Lord saw fit to come down and rescue me. I did say to him many times, I said, why couldn't I divorce before I became a Christian? And I didn't mean to bring his name into it. I'm sorry. But why didn't I? But then when I was a Christian, became a Christian, I realized that was the foundation. Like the Lord was committed to me. You know, marriage commitment, your dad and your mom told me right away that's where it's at. Where you stand. You know, a vow is a very serious thing to the Lord. So I didn't wrestle with it after that. I wrestled with, okay, how can I in this Christian walk be the best I can in this marriage the way it is? And when am I doing the people-pleasing thing, which it was a hard habit to break. And then when am I doing the healthy thing? The problem in my relationship, as opposed to yours, is you were able to talk. You all talked. We weren't able to talk. And every time, it would seem, if I talked seriously in my relationship, and I just said, hey, can we just talk about this? It was offensive to him that we were talking about it.
Wow.
You know, so it was really, really, really difficult.
I was thinking when you shared the people pleasing, like that started to be your survival response, wasn't it? This is how I'm going to respond.
I think it's been a response from a very long time ago. It was a way to be seen. And I think that, you know, obviously when the Lord gets a hold of our hearts and rescues us, we realize that we are seen by the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. That starts to heal. And then you read boundaries in marriage and all this, and you try to implement all these things, and you know you try not to go in fix-it mode, but at the same time you realize you're terribly broken. So, you know, as a new Christian and on, you're trying to grow in Christ, but at the same time, you're coming up against a bunch of baggage that you have. So it's a really wrestling against yourself, wrestling wrestling, fighting for a relationship, fighting to, you know, raise your children, you know, in God's will. It was, I look back at it, I'm like, Anna Gray, how did I, dang, how did I even do?
But I'm hearing how with your experiences, how you and Anna Gray could encourage each other and just what really both of you have been walking through. Like, that's just so powerful. And that's that piece, that's that iron sharpens iron. I mean, the Lord does that right there. I mean, he does. But, you know, going back to that piece about the dating part is the fact those feelings are still going to be there. It's just, my question would be just that level of intimacy. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but, you know, in your discernment, you recognize, okay, wow, this may not be healthy for me. I mean, that's huge.
But I think the problem I have here, Shelley, in this relationship,
Objection, girl.
no, I don't. No, you absolutely know everything. It's like, it looks so good. It looks so good on paper. Yeah. It did, but then, I mean, like, it was almost instantaneous. All of a sudden, it was like a rubber band.
In one conversation, which Renee,
my head was spinning because I would be like, "What?"
Well, Renee is one of my favorite people to talk to about relationships because I'm serious. You're like, oh no,
because I'm an old pro.
No, because in my first, when I was in my early 20s, because I'm in my late 20s.
I remember this.
I actually had no idea you even had baggage in your marriage. I literally thought everything was peaches and rainbows. But
unicorns.
I was...
Don't forget the unicorns.
Unicorns and sparkles. But I remember...
We were on the porch.
We were on the porch because you opened it up to let me just write. I was going through a breakup. And I was just I'd never dealt with them before. I'd never been in a relationship. I was feeling all these just deep, awful things that I didn't know how to process. And I remember she sat and talked with me. And one thing you said that I still think to, and even in this previous relationship that's now like buried, is she posed the question to me that she said, would you feel more anxious in this relationship than without it? Because I remember you said, all I see is anxiety, like when I was talking, and it was the same tension that I start to feel when I notice things are really off, and noticing a shift in significant others, and not just emotionally, like, oh, they're, you know, more spacey from me, but things that I can start to list and really notice a pattern. And she was the first to bring up that idea and was just like pivotal in helping me to process that. And
I don't know if that's wise advice or not, but
it was.
Oh wow!
But that was
I mean, it was great because it was awareness.
Well, this previous one too, I told Renee when I was like monologue audio memoing her one morning that she was the only person who I truly felt like understood exactly where I was coming from. It's not that everyone else didn't had amazing wisdom, but I did at times feel a bit like I was getting a little more beaten down and forced to believe that I was creating these self-fulfilled prophecies. And I'm like, look, I didn't initiate this person reaching out to them or this being sent to them or their confusion in this. I have kept all, like, and I could see it, but it started to create this doubt. But Renee was the only person who, even after, like, you know, there was a situation where there was a kind of challenging situation when we first began dating. And you were the only person who I think you weren't fully on board with that relationship.
No,
she was like,
living.
you will be have these expectations on you.
I wasn't living.
But that,
I was like very, very concerned. I went, this is not cool.
But I think it's because you could mirror that and understand what it felt like to walk in that, to live in that. I don't say that as a way to bring up baggage.
No.
But seeing you
I didn't want
and Lily and Lisa like walking through that in 2020 was so awful, like to watch, like, objectively, you know, like the fatigue in your face, in your body. Like, Mom and I were so concerned for her, like, physically, you know, because you had all this on your plate. You had, and I was obviously aware of, like, a little more at that point, but then, like, just the anxiety that you were dealing with, like, I felt like you could see I don't know if you felt the same way, and, like, you could, it was almost like looking into a mirror of, like, what you had experienced or not.
Was this before or after?
This was after.
Yes. Yeah, it was very, very, very hard. And but I think a lot of it was maybe just the fatigue coming out. I think I was just tired.
Yeah.
And I think when I say the whole house sighed, you know, we went through the winter. It was like La Brie, but we didn't talk. Nobody talked. We were tired.
That's it.
We were exhausted.
I mean, just think about what this does to our bodies long term when we're holding that heaviness, that tension in our body. I mean, just over time.
What does betrayal do specifically to women? I'm not singling women out because, you know, sexism, but we're women. What does it do mentally, physically? Like experiencing a bond with someone and then betrayal of that trust that's breached.
Physically, women can actually have health issues. I've worked with individuals to where it's called where they're holding tension in their hips to where it's actually affected their mobility.
Oh, my goodness.
Exercise, things like that. Sometimes individuals will end up having health issues, like severe health issues to where they're sick. I'll never forget, I was sitting in on a training, and one of the trainers talked about how one of her clients ended up having a tumor right there around her amygdala because of the trauma that was there. I mean, we can't exactly say, well, that was due to betrayal, but it's very odd for people to have a brain tumor right there around the amygdala.
What is that part of the body?
So that's our trauma response. That's our survival response. When I always use the example, if a child's about ready to walk in the middle of the road, we're going to pull a child immediately. That's how amygdala is like making a quick response. It's kind of that life or death response. And so when you've lived with someone, especially if there's been manipulation and then the betrayal, and if there's been abuse in there, you're constantly in that fight, flight, or freeze. Like you never get out of it. You're in survival mode. It affects individual sleep, digestion, major digestion issues, emotionally. Of course, we deal with depression, anxiety, a lot, PTSD. They've actually, I'm glad you asked that. They actually have done brain scans, and they showed men and women who have experienced betrayal trauma, their brain is activated just like someone who's in combat. Wow. So it's huge, the effects that betrayal trauma has on an individual.
So it is fascinating. I was just thinking, we're living in a world that focuses on the media and betrayals of some sort. Because, you know, we hear of husbands that only we always get likes if we mention OnlyFans, porn,
sex,
casual sex.
That's it.
And we haven't weed.
Mary Jane.
But I mean we're living in a world where our world congratulates that kind of behavior, but it is affecting it, and we're living in a world where women and men are walking around doing their jobs, raising the kids, paying the bills, working hard, particularly in our inflationary times, and yet they are experiencing major, major trauma and expected to make it all happen.
Yeah, we're in a world that says pornography is okay. During COVID, there was a specific company in a certain country that people had access to pornography for free. Okay, let's think about the reason behind that. But yet what we're doing, we're okaying this, which is breaking up marriages. Unfortunately, we know it's a part of trafficking that's happening, but we're okaying this. But
and
look at the devastation.
Action, which just drives us. We did that one interview with
Mark.
Yeah, look at the devastation that it's causing. And then the other piece is kids who are young, whose brains aren't fully developed. okay, what do we explain to them when it's called an in-house separation, or when mom or dad is living outside the home because of betrayal trauma? It affects the children, and they're confused, and how much you share with them, because they're at a place where they're not going to be able to comprehend everything that's occurring.
We're talking total generational breakdown.
What kind of betrayal, if you could give a breakdown of different types, because there's sexual, emotional, physical, what are some types? Because I think people think of it in extremes, but can you experience betrayal in a series of different ways?
Yes. So back in the 1990s, I'm not going to say her last name correctly, Jennifer Freyd, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. She came up with the term betrayal trauma, and she put it into 3 categories: romantic relationships, institutional abuse, and then childhood abuse. And those are the 3 types of betrayals. It's how she categorized it. So sometimes when I'm working with individuals, we may be talking about current betrayal, but they may have had betrayal from an employer, from the church, from a school.
Or in childhood.
In childhood, too, yes. And then, so you have those types of betrayals. Individuals can have a financial betrayal, like to where finances has been kept from the other person. Of course, like you said, the emotional, sexual, physical, there's those types of betrayals too. But it's been really interesting, the work I've done is individuals, when they're going through current betrayal, they'll receive betrayal from friends, community, to where they knew something but didn't tell anything to them, but talked about it with others. Or, I mean, I've had family members who went through betrayal trauma, and I can remember some of the things that were said was, well, aren't you over it yet? It's been 6 months.
Yeah. Well, they say that about death, too.
Yes.
Like,
I mean, and this
aren't you,
really?
you need to get out of that. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You need to get out if you're just doing more, if you do something for the church, do something for others, you'll be fine. Yeah.
It's so sad, because really that betrayal, unfortunately, ends up being a domino effect. We may have that discovery, but then we realize there's been more betrayals than just that one.
Yes. That is the wild thing, is that there is a rabbit trail that you discover afterwards.
Yeah.
And that is the uncovering. But is there a place where, I think we live in a confused world of what betrayal is, because I know I did for a fact, and I know what others have. You're like, okay, is really long distance, let's say, communication, audio, visual, excuse me, I can't say it, or is going on to OnlyFans, or is all the streaming that people follow on Instagram really betrayal? I think we doubt that now, because it's so normal in our society.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay to have a talk with
Full
somebody.
front nudity in movies.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay.
But what's
Celebrity crushes. Sorry.
Yes.
Just saying.
Well, but individuals who went through betrayal trauma, just watching a commercial can be a trigger, because of just some of these commercials we have is like soft porn. It just is.
I don't have a cable.
I mean,
so I have no idea.
I mean, it's amazing. So, I mean, we can be triggered by so many things, or where our spouse or partner ends up justifying, well, this is okay. No, it's not okay to view pornography. It doesn't matter if it was one time or 50 times a day. It's just not okay.
Do you consider it infidelity?
Yes, I do.
Oh, man.
I do consider it infidelity,
how
because they're
hard-
lusting after someone else. I'm sorry, if you're masturbating, you're lusting after someone else.
Yeah.
You just
but do you know how hard it is for people, women or men, to accept that of their, like, that's
And it's just not pornography, these graphic novels. There's so many women, and it breaks my heart.
We talked about it in was it? No, with Lord TV.
Yeah.
There's women I work with to where they were introduced to pornography. It started off with a graphic novel. But we normalize certain books. I won't say those titles. that, oh, it's okay to read these erotica novels. No, because it opens the door.
It does open doors.
To that. And then men too, I've noticed that more women deal with so much shame around it. Patrick Carnes, who I did my training through, he talks about the shame cycle. So men and women get stuck in the shame cycle.
So explain that.
So what happens is we'll end up having something that's overwhelmed us, that's bothered us, and we're like, okay, how can I cope? How can I manage this? So we'll have pre-contemplation, contemplation, and then we've learned in the past, well, the way I can escape whatever stress or whatever's bothering me is I'll go to pornography or I'll go to an affair partner so that I can, in that moment, have a temporary escape.
Right.
But then we feel guilt and shame about what happened. And with shame, it's not about what we did. The shame is about how we see ourselves. So then we have this downward spiral. And then when we want to escape that feeling of shame, and so
they do it again, repeat,
that's it,
rinse
yeah.
and repeat.
Yeah, and that's where
escapism.
It is. That's where my heart goes out for individuals who have an addiction with pornography. Is for the fact of sometimes they were introduced to pornography against their will at a young age.
Oh, yeah. We did a segment on that, and I was telling them it was very normal in the 1970s.
Yeah.
If you didn't see the Playboys in the neighborhood, it was shocking.
Yeah, I mean that's.
I mean, for at least several people I know.
Yeah. So what has happened is that well, this is a way I've learned, because sometimes being exposed to pornography ended up there. I'm not going to go into a huge piece of it, but ended up there was agreement involved in that, and so here's all this shame
oh my goodness.
That's involved in this, and maybe being taught masturbation for the first time, and my heart breaks for individuals who are in that cycle because there is a way out of it, but because of so much shame, there's this fear of if I go to someone, well, how are they going to perceive me?
Right.
And so I hold this space of where betrayal is wrong, because I know how it affects the betrayed and the betrayer. Betrayer, if they admit, yes, this is what I've done, they deal with shame. And I also, hold space for those individuals who have become addicted to pornography, because usually it's come out of an abusive situation. And so, I mean, it's just heartbreaking to see
the cycle.
what's happened.
Well, so how is the cycle able to be broken?
Yes. It's been wonderful.
Said,
I've seen it. I've seen individuals who
well,
do it.
I want you to go for a second and tell me a little bit about your weekends that you've been holding.
Yes.
And the book that you have been put together.
Yes. So God just opened. I used to be a teacher, and that has definitely helped me as a counselor. So when I started working with individuals who experienced betrayal, I started creating handouts because I'm a visual person, being a teacher. And so what started off as handouts ended up, I created a workbook that I'm hopefully going to start working on being edited this summer. And from that workbook, I started leading betrayal groups and weekend intensives so that men and women can come and have community, but also have an extension to the therapy that they're already doing with their counselor. And in that part, it's been great because with the women, they're saying, I'm not alone in this. That's what I said, or that's what I felt. And to hear another person say the same thing, it's like, okay, I'm not alone. Because unfortunately, with betrayal, sometimes those who have been betrayed, they feel shame too. And you mentioned grief. Like, there's so much grief when there's betrayal. And part of that grief is losing that identity, which is why I mentioned to you about that core being. Why we don't want to lose that core being, because then we grieve those pieces that we lost of ourselves in that.
I find this so fascinating in how you're breaking down like your core values, also betrayal and shame. And it's interesting because as I reflect on previous relationships, like I experienced betrayal very in very intense ways, but it almost makes things that are smaller, like my previous relationship, something where it's not like pornography or these things being dug up, but even just other interactions I was unaware of that it almost like makes me re-feel that, if that makes sense.
It does.
I'm gonna be really honest. This will probably feel good to say. I hate the word triggered too, but I can barely stand certain like celebrity Instagrams or even hearing people obsess over how perfect they are because
I'm sorry.
you're thinking of one thing, but that's it too. Secular and Christian genre. Where's the black and white?
I'm sorry. It's an inside joke and we're laughing.
There was an instance years ago where and we talked about this on a podcast. I opened someone's bedroom door that they were trying to keep closed while they were studying theology, and there was Sports Illustrated Bikini Edition plastered all over. And it was that same shock and whoa. And it's like without being able to say in that moment, these are standards I'll never be able to reach. Yeah. That was there. I'm like, why is this so important? And why am I like having a physical human being with a soul not good enough? Yeah. Instagram. And even like, I feel almost this sense of immense jealousy, envy. I don't want to say hatred, but sometimes close when guys even overemphasize female athletes, actresses, like feeling in love with them, drawn to them. Because I'm like, I've experienced not just that, like, someone like a poster, but things where that was kind of the start of it and what I saw. But then, there being these other emotional connections with other girls and years past, or in one instance, someone downright lying to me and, a lot of deceit and people they were talking to and pretending it's a guy when it's a girl, things like that, to where, and I don't know if this makes sense at all, but if I experience that in dating or relationships, and even in this previous one where, again, it was nothing like I'm finding posters and like really dirty stuff, but things that almost feel like, oh no, is this the same thing happening again? Is there's always someone else. That's always the fear. And when that starts to, I don't know, it always starts to like reignite and bring up past stuff. So how do you reconcile that when you've dealt with immense betrayal in the past and maybe you're experiencing it emotionally in some ways, or you feel a bit deceived, as you brought up earlier, but you don't want that, like your past baggage to, you don't want to create a reality off past baggage. How do you reconcile that?
And I
don't know if that makes sense.
That
that's a good
she's
question.
saying too, what I hear, and I don't know if this is valid or not, but like she feels undervalued.
Oh yeah.
And underprotected.
Yeah.
And not any of the things. I think what we're also asking is like, is there hope? Is there any hope? Because after coming through something like this, you're hypersensitive, you're hyper aware, you're hyper afraid.
Yes.
And you also begin to look at yourself and you go, I have so much to work on. What do I have to offer anybody else?
Yes.
Like there's nothing here. Like just skip it. It's just best that I go outside to the hay-mow and walk and talk with God because He
Duct
is
tape yourself here that says close to business.
Exactly.
What can we say?
No, the caution tape.
That's a caution tape.
Dark inside. Don't come in.
Right. But I think the first thing, though, is we got to give ourselves grace.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
what does that look like?
The piece is, I think sometimes what happens is we take on too much responsibility. That's that whole boundaries piece. I use the example where we
Henry Cloud would not be happy.
Henry Cloud.
He's like, talk dirty to me.
But like, here's this fenced-in area, and we really had to start looking at, okay, we got to keep this out. Those things that conflict with our identity and who we are. So part of it is we got to give ourselves grace.
Grace how? For what?
Yeah. Well, grace
We're
for
bad
the fact
at I am bad at doing that.
We're like grace for getting ourselves into this.
It's not my greatest sport.
Well, that's it. It's that part of where I think sometimes we put too much responsibility on ourselves because we are trusting this individual and what they're saying. And over time, that trust is built. And when something happens, we end up blaming ourselves for something that they did. but it's not our responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's where that boundaries piece comes in, of where what I'm responsible for stays here.
Yeah, what was on
These
my
other
side
pieces,
of the street.
that's it, stays over here. And that's where we give ourselves that grace in it, to where it's like, no, you can't take that on. That's not your responsibility. So that's one of the pieces. Give yourself grace.
So you have to be very aware of what you're thinking at that time to get it out.
Well, even if you're not aware of it in that moment, go take the walk.
Yes,
And process it,
talk
and
to
then
Lord.
that's it. Yeah. Another piece is knowing, like I said, who you are, and I think that's something. I don't think we'll fully know who we are because we're broken people. I mean, I just do. I think that's always going to be a process. I think there's a refining.
Get to heaven, the new earth.
Yeah, we're going to constantly have that refining, but it is about knowing who you are. More importantly, it's about knowing who God is.
That's so nice.
Because when we know who God is, even when we doubt our identity, we're going to be reminded of who He says we are.
Forget not His benefits.
What about when you've also been the one to have toxic actions, or as I have self-confessed on our Cadaver podcast, like when you were once a walking red flag, or maybe previous relationship, you realize, wow, maybe I like reacted too quickly in this way. Like I did the right thing, but maybe I did it too soon. You know, how do you reconcile those when you know you've done some, when you can look and see, okay, I could improve on this, and this, even if it wasn't the initial deal breaker.
Right. Well, I was going to say, I think that piece of where you're being hard on yourself, of maybe the way you've responded, you want to do different in the future, but you ending it, you see that was a healthy response. I mean, that's the part of seeing, okay, no, that was healthy that I ended this, but my response, okay, I need to work on that piece and how I do it. That's really important, because sometimes we think because, well, the way I communicated it, okay, that was harsh, or maybe I ended it too quickly. Well, if it wasn't a healthy relationship, did you really end it too quickly?
Oh, I needed to hear that. I needed to hear that. Again, it's not that I sit here thinking that I needed to rekindle everything, but it's just like leftover thoughts you have, like, because
that's it.
I think you can be in a place, and I've, like I said earlier, started to get there where, okay, other men are attractive again, you know, because you convince yourself, like, no, they're the only person. I'm never going to find love. I'm nothingness and crumbs. That's my self-talk, at least. And I find it difficult, like those voices in my head. It's almost like it will take me right back to the exact moments it ended. And it's like, no, like.
You're wanting to do do-overs.
Kind of.
But it sounds like there's that inner critic. That inner critic's coming in and saying everything you did wrong, and we're minimizing what you did right.
Oh. Do you feel that way after like 30 plus years? Or did you see it so clearly that eventually you got to the point?
I saw it so clearly then. I mean, it was before me, and it was affecting another person in my family that I love dearly, and it was my job to protect her. And but afterwards, it was I had the hard time of I went to my pastor at the time, and like, wait, is this? And I mean, turns out afterwards there was a lot more that became uncovered. But it was a real struggle. You know, I mean, again, I was just tired, and now I've started looking at myself, and I'm thinking, okay, I think what has happened to me, Anna Gray, is I just feel this is why I'm not okay. I feel all those emotions, and the number one at the top of the list was worthless.
Oh,
you know, it's just like, what, you know, and not only that, you look at my age and you're like, you know, it's over for me, but like I'm really hopeful for her. So I want this to work. But and for my children who are not married. So it's a real struggle. Yeah.
I want to go back too, because I don't feel like I completely answered your questions. Like I said, giving yourself grace, remind yourself of boundaries in those pieces. Another part is talking it over with a friend, a counselor. This is what I've learned. This is what I've gained in those pieces. And then, like I said, that other part, when I don't say we forget, but sometimes when we get distracted and who God is and who He's called and created us to be, I feel like that's when some of that shame will kind of creep in and say, well, it's going back to, no, this is who He is. And the God who parted the waters says, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made.
Right.
I'm going to trust that.
So you're saying when we start living and walking in our identity in Christ is when the shame, the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy.
It does. I mean, I struggled with shame for so long, and I'm not saying it still doesn't pop up for me. I have my triggers too, but that's the reason actually I went into counseling. Shame was my name. Like, that was my identity. The people pleasing, whatever I could do, everything was always my fault. No boundaries whatsoever.
Oh, wow.
I wanted, because I didn't believe I had that worth and value. Yes. I didn't believe I had any worth or value. So what happened roughly as a young adult, I started learning, if you work obnoxiously an amount of hours, like way beyond what you're supposed to, and people love what you do and like you for what you do, well, then that's your identity. There's your worth and value. And I mean, that was a rough battle. Thank goodness, like, I married a husband that was always about, you're working too much, you're doing too much, because he just loved me for me, and thank goodness I have him in my life. But even now, whenever there's a situation where I feel left out or maybe not seen, I'll go back to that shame place, and it's like, no, I'm not going back there.
I'm curious on that note too, and the word worthless stands out to me. How do you begin to step into your identity in Christ when you've heard over and over or lived it for 30 years, you are worthless, you're a piece of shit, like, and I can identify with, for me, my metaphor is I feel like nothingness and crumbs. Like, I feel like an emotional support pet. I feel like the or emotional punching bag. I feel like the void. I feel like a void filler. I feel like I love men back to security, and that goes when Renee said worthless. The idea of having your value diminished when you've had that either repeated over and over, or you've lived it for so long. How do you rewire that? What steps do you take to, you can have the head knowledge and know that,
I know,
and I can know that, but I not feel it and want it from other people and want it so badly, like to hear it from somebody, or like a lover, you know, using that in the olden term, of course.
There's a few things that's helped me. One is being aware of what I'm feeling. Okay, why am I feeling this way? And that takes really, I recommend everyone, I don't care if you're in therapy or not, we really need to take 10 to 15 minutes a day just to reflect, because sometimes we're feeling a certain way, or shame is navigating our path and we're unaware of it because we're so busy. So it's so important to slow it down. If we can, 10 to 15 minutes a day. I'm a realist though, and I encourage people at least 3 to 4 days a week, take 10 to 15 minutes. If it's your brain needs to be still, the thoughts need to be still. So I walk to quiet my brain. My body's not still, but my brain's still. So one of the things is awareness, being aware of what you're feeling, tension in your body and emotionally feeling. Second thing is, recently I went back to journaling because some things have come up for me again, and that has been huge because my brain is starting to be quiet again, and I'm seeing the lies that I'm writing down. I'm seeing those old patterns that used to be in my life. And then the third piece, thank goodness that we have God's Word, because the more that I've studied and listened, the more I can go to His Scripture. And so instead of having this shame dialogue 24/7, it may only be there 30 minutes. Now that 30 minutes can still be exhausting, but it's nothing in comparison to that 24 hours. And so those are the three things that I would encourage individuals to do in that piece. The other part, the fourth one I forgot, is identifying those self-defeating beliefs. There's some great handouts out there. It talks about performance perfection.
Yeah, there you go.
The people pleaser. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, I'm people pleasing. We really need to be able to call it out for what it is.
Right.
I'm people pleasing. No, can't do that. Oh, wait a minute, there's that performance perfection. And calling it for what it is. And being like, this is not what God has for me. It's in some ways, it's kind of rebuking the enemy. No, this is not what God has for me. I wish I had had that handout on self-defeating beliefs and cognitive distortions when I was a teacher. It would have really helped me sleep more in those 10 years of teaching, because I focused so much on that people-pleasing and being enough and doing enough.
Do you have the book is not out yet? I mean, the workbook.
No, it is not, because I've got to work with an editor to get to that. But that piece is in there when I talk about the inner critic and those self-defeating beliefs.
Does that tie into self-sabotage by chance, or is that a completely different concept? There's a chart someone handed me relationally involved, or like dealing with the relationships and things of that nature, where self-defeating beliefs was in that layer.
It would have to be.
It's
because,
in there.
I mean,
It's considered a self-defeating belief. The self-sabotage is. It's sometimes it's others blame, self-blame. Sometimes you'll see that used when it says self-sabotaging. It'll be self-blame. Sometimes you'll see that in there.
So how do women go forward after all this? And they obviously need time to work through their stuff. But what I'm hearing from you is it's a constant work, just like our lives are just a constant work. And the awareness that we have is a constant work. And if you're a believer in Christ, you have the Holy Spirit living in you, you have that help. If you're not, then you just have to be aware.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, be mindful is the new
the
buzzword. Okay. So how do you go forward? So if you've done these things
the
and you're ready.
$1 million question.
Yeah. So I had created, it was called Stages of Betrayal, and what we do is we get to that grief piece, and then after we identify losses, there's a place of forgiveness. Not only forgiveness for the person who's hurt us, but sometimes we put a lot of responsibility on ourselves. So forgiving ourselves for what's happened, and then recognizing, wait a minute, I don't need to be attached to what this person did, even if I had that bad day, or even if my communication was off in this situation. It never justifies what that person did. And so we release ourselves from that betrayer. After forgiveness, we look at boundaries. We also, with boundaries, look at forming or reforming or rebuilding our identity, because usually there's going to be losses in our identity when there's been betrayal. And then David,
or even just loss.
Yes. And then I loved the last part is about we start looking at our legacy.
We love talking about death and legacy.
That's it. So what's my legacy going to be right now in this moment? What impact am I going to have on individuals? What's my impact going to be in this culture? Like whatever that would be, and really redefining that purpose.
So as we were working on that, we were redefining our sense of self in the sense of what God has created us to be.
That's it.
Or if you're not a believer, what you feel like your core values are.
That's
that are
it.
moral, good core values.
Yeah.
And then we're rebuilt a new person, new bionic person, so that we are armor when we are afraid to enter into the dating pool.
Oh my gosh,
right. And when those triggers are there, we identify like, oh, I know what this is. I need to process it. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. Okay, now I'm going to put this here. I'm not going to allow that to weigh me down. And I'm going to keep
and
living.
Get into another relationship.
What are healthy ways you can focus on bettering yourself emotionally when you're recovering from breakup, divorce, betrayal, kind of that umbrella. Because for me, the tendency used to be incredibly impulsive and engage in like really risky behaviors, like night hiking with strangers.
Yes.
Some things were life.
I forgot about that.
That was Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, it was a lot riskier and hanging out
Yes.
with not great people.
Right.
Decided, taking really, taking very risky behaviors and adventures that I didn't tell my mother till after it all happened. But even in the last few months, I've been trying to focus on things that are life-giving, like
That's your love, Amazon.
oh my gosh.
It is.
But how do you
Yeah.
move forward and bettering yourself? And like you said, speaking on legacy, recultivating who you are versus distracting and numbing.
That's it. No, I agree. So it's going to be intentional. Like, because I think sometimes what happens is because of what we experience with betrayal, we're not intentional with our decisions anymore because we're doing it out of either our nervous system or a defense response.
Or like serial dating as a response.
Yes,
Well, I mean,
exactly.
and I think there's a I deserve this attitude that we have to be very, very, very careful.
So we really
about.
want to be intentional
Yeah.
and really be aware of, okay, when someone invites me out for dinner, girlfriends are going out, okay, is that really what I want to do tonight? Or am I doing that as a way to prove others wrong? Like, what's my motivation behind it? Hey, look at me. I'm out on the town. It's so important to be intentional with our decisions because I think when we've experienced deception or the confusion of a relationship, we're not intentional anymore with our decisions because someone else has influenced us in that. Another piece I think is important, I don't know if y'all ever saw the movie P.S. I Love You, but in that movie she lost her husband.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end she talks about there's different kind of loves. Go find those different kind of loves you have, if that's hiking, if that's writing, if it's being in community.
I've just had so much fun rediscovering all the things that I love, or new things.
Yeah, that's it. It's
Yeah.
like finding
good,
all these,
healthy, wonderful things.
It's finding all those loves in it. And the other piece is if you're not in that place, just falling back in love with the Lord. Because He is going to be the healer of it. I mean, emotionally, He's going to be the healer of our pain. He is.
And we're going to have to trust Him.
That was what I was going to say. Yes, that's it. We're going to have to trust Him with the purpose, the calling, the legacy that He's calling us to live.
Ask you out, you
Oh my
have
gosh.
to trust.
Well, I love what you're saying about love too, because I think we often think of being in love as a romance, but to be in love, I think, is to exist in love. And I'm not to get too philosophical, but I'm like, if God is love and He's within us, like that's an overflow far deeper than romance, 30 seconds of thrill or what have you.
And I think having those seasons where we take a break, I know for me, after high school, I mean, I didn't really date that much because honestly, I didn't really like the guys I went to high school with, no offense. But I just decided I really wasn't going to date. I think there was a lot of work I needed to deal with. I told y'all I dealt with shame too. So I didn't date anyone really until I met my husband. And it's okay to wait, not to give in to those societal pressures.
You know what my pastor said?
Yes.
Our pastor.
Yes.
He said, Pastor Robert said, be very, very, very picky.
That's it. And I mean, I'll tell you, ladies, me and my husband broke up. He had already bought the engagement ring. We broke up.
What?
2 weeks, totally heartbroken,
That's
watching
like a
all
part
the
two
sappy
for our
movies.
podcast.
Watching all the sappy movies. And then I was like, no, this is not the life that God's called me to live. Not in a bad way. His loss, my gain. I was like, and I did not
That's
go
so
out there
empowering.
looking for anyone. Granted, yes, we got back together within a few weeks and are now married. But I mean, we had been dating for over a year and had not dated anyone or fell in love with anyone. And we broke up, and he was the one who broke it off. My poor roommate, she was like, I got to get her out of the house. So, I mean, those pieces happen. And in that, if this is we got to trust God with our stories.
Right.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That's what my dear Mariah and Thomas told me in Costa Rica. What's meant to be will be.
Yeah.
Okay, so that right there is the moral of the story. Is the morality is to trust the Lord and trust the work that He's put in us and the identity that He's put in us to work through this.
Well, I think to exist in love versus trying to just go and romanticize it
Yes.
to
Yes.
partnered expectations.
Yeah.
I think it all.
This was really good.
That was good.
Wow,
That
thank
felt
you.
good.
What are you going to name your book?
Rebuilding after betrayal.
Ooh.
That is very good. We can't wait for the workbook.
I feel like we should do a part 2 once the book is out. Then we can link it in our show notes.
Yes.
And
Done.
I'm so curious
give y'all
about yours
free
and your
copy.
husband's story now too, with engaged, broken off. So I'm
Yes.
like, got a great cliffhanger.
That is
Good
That's
content.
it.
and
Been there,
clickbait.
done.
Yeah.
Yes. I know those parts. It's hard.
Well, Michelle Gallimore, we want to thank you. Thank you for all your work with so many men and women in our area. And we just know that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And we just thank you for gracing the halls of the morality.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And we thank you, audience, for being with us. And we enjoy you. And
Hurrah. Shalom. Cheer.
Yes. Thank you.
More cheer.
Hey, I'm Renee Leonard Kennedy,
And I am Anna Grace Smith.
and we make up.
Moral Tea Podcast.
Yes, we're so glad that you're listening to us, and we want to encourage you to like and subscribe at
Moral Tea Podcast on YouTube
pray.com.
and Instagram at Moral Tea Podcast.
Yes.
We will catch you every Monday.
Bye.
Peace.